So I've heard that CLM is dead. Seems to be the hot topic of the moment.
It does. There's certainly narrative going around. It's an interesting one because when I think about that statement, I think of CLM. I mean, stands for Contract Lifecycle Management, which I guess it suggests that managing contracts or life cycle is probably a pretty bold statement. It's more of a kind of a headline grabber. But I think what it really comes down to is the solutions that are traditionally dealt with contract lifecycle management, which is very much a web app, all in one destination. Everything has to happen there. The narrative of that way of solving that problem, maybe there's more, I guess, validity in suggesting that those solutions are maybe not as fit for purpose. But certainly, from my perspective, CLM being dead is not necessarily a narrative we'll be agreeing with.
Obviously, from our perspective, we're seeing that the market is huge, and we're still talking to a lot of people that have never ventured into CLM. So what would you kind of say to them, to the ones that have never used CLM before? Is this still something they should explore, or are there other options?
Yeah, I think what we're finding is that people are realizing that I guess the pure depth of CLM and how wide-ranging it is. I mean, if you think of a contract life cycle from drafting the contracts, the inception of it, through to the workflows, the power approvals, and who needs to be involved in the conversation, then through to review and negotiation, which is a complex, I guess, part of the process in itself, through approvals and signature, and then even once it's signed, an agreement has variations, it has extensions, and novations, and all sorts of, I guess, activity post-signature. So I think what we're finding is that, rather than looking to one solution that has been doing the entire process in one app, the kind of point tools that have been coming to market that are very focused on one area, it's just creating, I guess, a more competitive environment around interactions with contracts. So my honest opinion is it's a good thing. It's making people really realize that at every stage of contract lifecycle, there is tech, or there is we're making it more efficient. And it's exactly the narrative that we've been talking through. So it's more about how you solve each interaction than do you need a tool, which has very much been the narrative historically.
And I've also read that SaaS is dead. What do you make of that?
It's definitely not dead. I think it's, what we're seeing is this evolution of, I think people describe it as a point and click tool, which is everything's around logging into a web application. You navigate it through filling in fields or drop downs and kind of that UI versus obviously, when ChatGPT came to the market, it was a natural language interface. So all of a sudden, people are used to actually, I guess, navigating or interacting with tools through a chat interface.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's kind of talking the same thing about SaaS, which is, well, maybe the traditional kind of interface of how you deal with a software solution is going to change. And they're already feeling a bit of that change because there's, well documented that HubSpot just announced their integration with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
You can interact with the HubSpot data via ChatGPT's interface. So you're just seeing this narrative kind of go through all of SaaS, where it's how you interact with the tool. It's not that the actual application of that tool or the efficiency that tool provides is dead. It's more that the user interface and user experience is changing and evolving.
If I'm a total novice to AI, and obviously there's such a lot of noise about AI, why couldn't I just use ChatGPT to look at my contracts?
Yeah, and a lot of legal teams have done that. I think there's a number. I mean, obviously the first answer is probably the privacy security side of it. I know a lot of people talk about that, but it is, unless you've got very specific settings at probably an enterprise level, you're always risking just sending your data outside of your firewall. It's going into public domain essentially, and as a lawyer, dealing with confidential information,
probably not the best
thing to start with. So that's certainly prime reason number one. But the second is, when you've looked at Gen AI and ChatGPT, it's been trained on the internet. So what you're asking it in terms of your instruction is going to use its knowledge of just the entire internet to be able to give you back a response.
Yeah.
which, as you can imagine, if you've ever used Google for legal advice, it's not always the
Yeah.
response. So what kind of ChatGPT is good at is a kind of individual, almost like transactional conversations where you would otherwise have gone to Google, or you will otherwise have used the internet for research, and it's a one question, one answer type communication. It's amazing for that. Contract review is very different. Contract review is a complex process. You've got to find things that are relevant, first of all. You've got to kind of scan the contract to understand it. Then you've almost got to triage it against some kind of rule book or your knowledge or what you previously agreed to. It can also be external factors like, is the company going through an acquisition, or are you raising, or are you on a cut cost mission? Like, all these different things can influence how you negotiate contracts. And then you've got to actually produce red lines and comments, and in a way that is conducive to a third party interacting with you. So if you think about all those steps, it's a very complex process. Just going to ChatGPT in terms of that transactional manual is not going to cut it for a complex task like that.
What about the rise of the sort of AI, we call them point tools? So just for AI contract review, for example, how do you kind of counter the argument that you could just start with that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it's an argument we've been sort of, using for a while against other platform CLMs. I mean, I think when people talk about point tools, what they're really talking about is a very embedded kind of complementary solution to whatever task it is that they're doing. So previously, maybe use a Chrome extension when you're on a web page, interact with that web page. That's purely some of a point tool. So when we look at points like a word add-in, essentially what it's doing is interacting with the document at that time, and it's a tool to make that particular process more efficient. We've had a word add-in for years now. So in many ways, we're the first to market with a word add-in. And very much we saw that same thing, which was, well, at that point in time, having something that sat in Word was the best type of, augmentation you could give to a lawyer. And we've expanded that throughout the CLM. So we've got chatbots that deal with sales teams, for example, when they want to create a contract, or, we've got a Outlook and Gmail assistant when we get something for a third party, because that's how you interact with the third party via email. So you could almost argue that we've had a series of point tools, as in deeply embedded, help you with the interaction at that point. And this is the thing about when we come back to that CLM is dead. I don't think anyone would argue that having a tool that makes every interaction with the contract throughout the life cycle is going to be a bad thing. That's always going to be a positive, particularly if it gives you insight to every step of the way about how efficient you've been, how quick you responded, and how quickly you completed tasks, all the analytics that sit behind that. And that's very much what we see.
Oftentimes it feels like people are not necessarily clear on the problems that they want to solve first. So could you speak to sort of the success statements that we've brought in at Summize and how that's kind of helped shape the goals and objectives of CLM so you can prove the value?
Yeah, I think, this comes from working in-house, right? With various different industries and different roles. You soon realize that every lawyer's role is not the same. And an important use case for me in a large company that never negotiates on my standard terms is a very different use case to, being a smaller company that's a challenger brand where you're always on third-party payment. So, we try to recognize this from day one, that you don't try and just have one solution that you could roll out to every company in the world. You've almost got to make it flexible and say, well, what is the biggest pain point you have right now? It might be these, I worked in a software business. It was all about the volume that was coming through, trying to make sales be more efficient, don't be a bottleneck. It's trying to make sure that the 4 or 5 points that always got negotiated were, as easy as possible to get through legal. I've also worked at a very regulated environment where actually the partnership agreement's a huge value contract. I wouldn't have necessarily wanted the same efficiency in that because it wasn't a volume thing. It was more about making sure the terms we agreed were compliant. Right? And we tracked those obligations post signature. So when we looked at our success statements and more about how we implement the tool, we say to the customer, look, what's your biggest pain point? Where are you spending the most time? Where do you need efficiency? And where do you just need a tool to track obligations, for example? And we will literally roll out the use case first that's going to solve the biggest pain. And then we can move on to the next one and the next one, and a spirit-based formula. But it's to reflect the life of an in-house legal team.
Well, on that note, I know you're very busy, so thank you for your time. I'll let you get back to your day job.
Cheers. Thank you.